Story Tyrant here. Gonna talk to you about villains. I have these rules for villains. First off, if anyone tells you only their system works and you have to follow their system, yeah, walk away. This is what works for me, and I'm hoping if some of you are struggling with developing villains, or if you're wondering why a villain isn't working in your work, that maybe this could help. That's all. Actually have a villain, or do you have an obstacle, or do you have a rival? A rival is a person who is competing with your main character, usually for the same goal, the same boon or goal. Okay. So villains, rivals, or obstacles. So an obstacle, my favorite description of an obstacle for people is, does it have will or intent? No will, no intent, it's not a rival, and it's not a villain. So a mountain, you have to get over the mountain to bring the medicine to the town below. That's an obstacle. A snowstorm is an obstacle. It has no intent, it has no will. If you have a ship that's slowly sinking, that would technically be an obstacle, even if you're trying to stay alive and keep the ship afloat. The ship has no intent and no will. Even if your character starts thinking of the ship as having its own will or intent, or the ocean as being against them, the simple truth of the matter is it has no intent, it has no will. So it's an obstacle. And you can utilize obstacles all through your fiction. Hey. Where are you going? Really? You're going up there? Okay, that's Dabbers. She is a muse of the furry kind. A rival is someone competing for the same thing your primary character, your POV, your hero protagonist is competing for. The job, the spouse, potential spouse, the date, the boon of some kind, the treasure. Now, they're a rival because they're not evil, they have their own reasons for doing this. Think, what are you doing? Okay. Think two people competing for the same job, or two people competing for the same position. Neither one is evil, neither one has intent to do harm, they both want the job. Then that's a rival. It can be, you can show how the rivalry, what it brings out in your character, their best and their worst. That's usually how a rivalry is shown. Also, rivals can become friends. They can work together to defeat another person. A villain is not a rival, and it's not an obstacle. A villain is someone whose intent is to do harm, usually for personal benefit. A villain can operate right in the open or in the shadows. It can be known or not known, but they are intending to do harm. They have a long-term approach. They are striving. Now they can be right out in the open, like the evil vizier or the dark lord or the whomever, right? Or they can be someone in the background that your detective is pursuing, a serial killer or a monster, a werewolf that turns. Werewolves tend to be more victims, but maybe a vampire that's sucking the life out of the town. Some people argue that monsters aren't true villains, but a villain has intent and will. So as long as that monster has intent to do harm and the will to carry it out and gain something, they don't necessarily have to gain something, but they should gain something for doing the harm. No one gets up in the morning and says, today I shall be a villain, today I shall be the bad guy. That doesn't happen. So it doesn't matter who your villain is. If they're a villain, they have to be a villain. Okay, so I wrote out some notes so that I have this clear. Tyra's first rule of villains. Your villain will not appear to be evil. Okay? I'm talking no black hat, no snidely whiplash, long mustachios, no wearing black all the time. Also, they're not going to look over and say, oh, there goes evil Frank John, evil. Oh, look, he's killing kittens again, wearing all black and laughing maniacally. Who could the murderer be? Yeah, no, don't do that. Don't do that. Second rule. These actually, I don't want to put numbers because no one of these is more important than the other. So everyone is the hero of their own story. So my villain will feel justified in what they're doing. Their actions, their belief, they have a reason for them. It could be completely screwed up, completely messed up reasoning. but they still have a reason for it. They still have a logical progression of events, thoughts and actions and reactions. When your villain, your hero, any character works from conviction, then when they're thwarted by your hero or by other things in your story, other factors, they get angrier. They get more enraged. They can justify more. Literally, by having strong convictions, you get to have more at stake. Now, your heroes are only as good as the villains they face. So, another one of my rules is your villain will be resourceful, intelligent, and capable. The foil of the hero is the villain. Your hero must rise to meet the challenge. It's good if they fail several times. I mean, at least once. Come on. If you want a great hero, you have to have a great villain. Darth Vader makes Luke Skywalker the better hero. And by great, I don't just mean finding their best inner self, but forcing them to change in some way. Darth Vader drives Luke to become the better Jedi. Okay, the villain should have a wound of some kind. I'm talking something with strong or relatable psychological depth. I'm not talking like a fear of spiders or worms, or they don't like people eating nuts in public. Not something that there would easily be counseled out of. You know, they go see a therapist, or they take the really big spider and they put it in your hands. That works, by the way, on really big spiders. Does no effect on the little ones. But anyways. And it's important that the wound, the psychological wound, has, at least to me, and again, this is my opinion, has an element of shame so that they hide it. Now, it doesn't have to be shame like sexual abuse shame. The type of shame, how the shame is, that's up to the individuals. One person might be ashamed of the fact that, I don't know, they like red fingernails on women. It might be a shameful thing to them. But it has to be part of a deeper psychosis. I wrote it like this. There should be an element of shame to the wound that has twisted some part of the villain, part of their lives, and is an active part of their lives. So my examples I wrote, this is for myself, was Hannibal Lecter, The Hitcher, and Lord Voldemort. Another thing that's important is your villain should be afraid. People are going to find out their secret. They're afraid that people are going to find out that they've been stealing money or shifting things around. If you're watching The Expanse, the villain there is Marcus Inaris, and he is a narcissist, and he is afraid that his son is going to pass him, and he has to keep tearing him down in little ways. You see him manipulating people, gaslighting them. It's done beautifully. The actor's doing a fantastic job. The writing is great. And you can see the villain that this person is. Your villain is afraid. Add fear to any character, and it brings more depth to their character. And if done right, there's more tension in the reader because they're more concerned and worried. Because they know how fear can derail. And we've all felt afraid. Fear can derail our better selves. Fear can derail our actions. Fear can motivate us to do things more or harder or stupider. So even though your killer has to feel justified in what they're doing, or your villain feels justified, or your overlord, whoever it is, feels justified, they're afraid. They know that they will not be understood. If they get caught, they're in trouble. If they get stopped, it's most likely because they're going to be killed. Real villains are afraid. This fear should never freeze your villain, though, but propel them into action. This is a really great area of both strength and weakness that you as a writer need to exploit and have your hero exploit. And the most important thing, and this really, I can't say this enough, this is so important. If you're having a villain, they have to actually be evil. They actually have to cause harm. Okay, so I wrote this out. Thought this is the best way for me to get my point across. They don't just tear the wings off flies or pushing old ladies off docks. We're talking I ate his liver with a nice Chianti and some fava beans. Evil. Have your villain do bad stuff. But Tyrant, I like my hero and I like my characters. Run, this is the wrong fiction for you. I'm serious. If you're having villains, they have to do bad things. You must torture your darlings. Kill them even. Remember, when they do the bad stuff, they justify it. It's important that you make the readers uncomfortable, or the viewer uncomfortable, I guess. My best example that I've seen in the last few years was the tragedy called The Joker. It came out, and we watched Arthur Fleck fall down the rabbit hole of self-destruction of both his psyche and self. And it was a beautiful tragedy, done beautifully. But as he's falling, you want him to stop. You want someone to catch him. You want someone to say no. You want him to be saved, and he's not saved. So even as he's falling, becoming the villain, you're rooting, wanting so much to stop the tragedy from progressing. It's important to make the reader uncomfortable. The scene, oh, spoiler, there's a scene in Joker on a train where you go from okay to whoa to oh no, and you've seen the line crossed, and it was done beautifully. It makes you very uncomfortable, and in that moment, the redemption is done. You know that we've lost redemption. Tragedy isn't complete yet, but the arc's spinning down. It's important that if you want to write a villain that is actually a villain, a bad guy who's actually the bad guy, he does bad things, or she does bad things. Remember, the hero must stop the villain because they must be stopped, not because the hero is the hero. The most common ones are revenge, righting a wrong, real or perceived, which then they tend to build on themselves. Protecting family, either from a real threat or perceived threat, and restoring order, usually because they're afraid. The modus operandi of your villain is important. There must be a logical and reasonable connection between the actions of the villain and their skill level, their ability to pull off the actions. If you have a fella who is 5'5", maybe weighs 96 pounds soaking wet, he is not strangling people. A large, strong man with a history of violence, him pummeling, strangling, beating, blunt object, that kind of action, yeah, that makes sense. Him poisoning someone doesn't make sense. A well-educated woman who had contact with someone who was big into gardening and maybe into noxious plants or poisonous plants, she would have knowledge and information so she could do a poisoning. Your 5'0", 78-pound woman grabs a .45 and shoots this guy. Well, she better A, have enough strength to handle the recoil, to actually be able to aim and fire the gun, i.e. training, because a .45 is like a cannon, a hand cannon. It's going to bounce over the place on a small person without the muscle mass to hold it. If the villain does not have the knowledge and the capability to pull off the crime, if they didn't do it, they're not the villain. Now, when I say that, the knowledge and the capability of doing the crime, they can also be using a cat's paw. So maybe they have a lot of ability to psychologically manipulate others to doing what they want. That works. But where do they get this training? Did they take classes? Also, the violence of the acts, of the crimes, of the villainy, has to make sense. The violence deployed has to make sense compared to the rage. The rage or the fear. So, they don't like spiders and they burn down their house? No. They don't like spiders, they buy 10 cans of Raid and nearly gas themselves? Yes. You need to have a balancing act. If the villain is way over the top, they become cartoonish and ridiculous. and aren't taken seriously. If they're way too subtle, then their ability to act becomes questionable. So you've decided you're writing a crime novel, and you have 5 suspects, and you decide to pull a name out of the hat at the end and you accuse them. Then you have to go back and plant the clues and make sure it lines up that this person is capable of doing the crime. Emotionally, mentally, and physically, there must be a level of logic and reason to this person being the villain. I hope that helps you know what you're doing right. And if you are having troubles or you're just wanting to up the tension, I hope that gives you some ideas, some focus, some areas that you can play with. Good luck. This is all my opinion. I hope it helps. From Life on the Edge of the Page, till next time we meet, stay safe, keep writing. Every word counts. And remember, story comes first.